Muslim countries, perhaps no nation on earth is more committed to accepting foreign migrants and refugees than Sweden. In 2016 alone, the country accepted more than 160,000 asylum seekers, despite having a population of less than 10 million people. Only 500 of these migrants were able to get jobs in Sweden. But if these arrivals aren't able to work, they're at least able to commit crimes. Quite a few of them, in fact. Ami Horowitz is a filmmaker. He went to Sweden to chronicle its refugee experience. Here's a short clip of what he found.
Do you see the violence really spreading across Sweden into the cities?
At least 1 or 2 times a week.
And let's say 5 years ago, how often would you say it was?
No.
3 times a year.
Really? The increase in this kind of crime is exponential.
I think we caught off guard. We didn't expect it to be so much increase.
Tucker spoke with the filmmaker earlier this week.
Ami, thanks a lot for coming on. So before you describe what you saw there, give us the overview. What is the justification within Sweden for importing this many migrants from other countries? Why are they doing it?
Well, in Sweden's own words, they consider themselves to be a humanitarian superpower, probably the only superpower that they would qualify for. So they feel that it's their moral duty to open their borders to all and any refugees that want to come to them.
So you've recently spent time there. Tell me if I'm overstating this. I don't think many people in Sweden think this is working well. Is that fair to say?
No, it's not fair to say, actually. In fact, most people that you ask about the refugee crisis, they will say, because the reason why I did the whole thing to begin with, taking a step back, was that there was an absolute surge in both gun violence and rape in Sweden once they began this open door policy. So they know that this crime is happening. They can feel it. The statistics are clear. But they would refer to what is the root cause behind it and say, oh, it's just more, it happened to be more violence. It's men who are raping people, not the refugees. They'll make excuses for it. The majority of the population in Sweden still want to have an open door policy. It's confounding.
Huh, that's remarkable. Now, the statistics on the crime rise that you just referred to, there have been reports in the American press that those statistics are either closely held by the Swedish authorities or they've been manipulated by the Swedish authorities to downplay the role of migrants in those crimes. Is that true?
Well, it depends. The crime statistics are the crime statistics, and they're not closely held. They're open to the public, and they do show this incredible surge of violence. What may actually be the problem is that they oftentimes try to cover up some of these crimes. That, for example, there's been a rash of these rapes, these music festivals, and what happens is they cover up as far as they could who the perpetrators were or if actually rapes had actually occurred. Now, obviously, when you have so many people witnessing these rapes, they're difficult to do, and they've come out to the public. But I think that's kind of what they're referring to, that the government has gone out of its way to try to cover up some of these problems.
That is grotesque. So to the job numbers, we had in the intro something like 160,000 asylum seekers, only 500 wound up working in Sweden. That leaves a lot of unemployed people. What are they doing and how are they living?
Oh, they live great, Tucker. I mean, it's one of the most generous, financial programs that they have in terms of the amount of money they're giving to them, the housing benefits they get, the education benefits they get, the cash benefits they get. So they have these, and what they really become are no-go zones. These are areas that cops won't even enter because it's too dangerous for them. This is the policy of the National Police Authority in Sweden. So they live in these enclaves, which, by the way, are lovely. They're leafy neighborhoods. They're beautiful apartments. And they are sitting around. You're right. It's difficult to get jobs. There's too many of them. But they have tremendous benefits there, which is why so many of these migrants are going to Sweden to begin with.
Now, we know that the masochism of the West really knows no bounds at all. So I believe you when you say that it's not often people say out loud, I'm dissatisfied with this arrangement. I know Swedes, though, who at least in private will say this is a disaster. What's the social sanction for saying that out loud? Can you just say, this isn't working, or do people come down on you for saying something like that?
Oh, you can say it, but you're a racist. You're a xenophobe, right? You're an Islamophobe. When I was out there, I remember I was at this kind of swanky party in Stockholm, and I started discussing what I was doing there, and the entire party kind of gathered around me and started yelling at me that all those things. I'm a xenophobe. I'm a racist. I'm anti-Islamic. Even though the statistics were clear about who's the perpetrators, it doesn't make a difference. It's very socially unacceptable to make these kind of claims.
Right, because the most important thing is to feel virtuous, I guess. Ami Horowitz, that's amazing. One last question, I can't resist. What's the long game here? How is this going to look 10 or 15 years from now? Does it seem like assimilation is taking place?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, we don't have to actually prognosticate on what the long game is. You can look at France and Belgium, because they've been doing it for that period of time for longer. And you can see the social unrest that's going on there, the terrorism that's happening there. Sweden, this is a relatively new policy, phenomenon for them. And by the way, Sweden had its first terrorist Islamic attack not that long ago. So they're now getting the taste of what we've been seeing across Europe already.
Sad. Thanks a lot for joining us. I'm Horowitz. Appreciate it. President Trump described the supposedly dreadful immigrant situation in Sweden. Journalists at every media outlet from here to Malmo have been debating how bad things really are there. They're fine, say a lot of them. Well, Katie Hopkins works as global columnist for the Daily Mail. Rather than going on Wikipedia or reading some Vox article to learn what to think, as most do, she decided to actually go to the country. She went to Rinkeby in Sweden, in the immigrant-dominated suburb of Stockholm that was torched by rioters last week. What did she find? Katie Hopkins joins us now. Katie, thanks for coming on. First of all, good for you for actually going. You always learn a lot when you get on a plane and go to the site. What did you expect to find, and how did it differ from what you found?
You know, I expected to find what a lot of people have been saying. It's like, there's nothing wrong, Sweden's beautiful, I live here, I see none of this. You know, I expected to see the Sweden I imagine from maybe Christmas cards or whatever. But, you know, when I got there, it's a very different story. Within 10 hours of landing, an asylum centre was burnt down, arson suspected. There was a hand grenade planted in a bin. And when I rushed there to find out what had gone on, I was told, well, why politicise this? Journalists are blamed, you know. Why make this a political thing? Why can't it just be a hand grenade in a bin outside a police station and a mosque? And I kind of felt like, oh, who's the mad one here, me or you? And then speaking to the women in particular, there's a much quieter story that's not being told, which is that women are frightened to go out. When I went to Rinkeby in the evening, I was the only female, certainly the only white female. And when I spoke to the ladies, it's because they're terrified of the crime. They're terrified of the gangs. And one particular lady I spoke to, she runs home at night because she's fearful of all the men that gather at night under the bridge where she lives. So they're kept indoors. So it's a really frightening place for a lot of women there particularly.
Well, the irony, of course, is that Sweden is the original feminist success story, and its own government describes it that way, as the first truly feminist country. And yet you're saying that Swedish women are afraid to go outside?
Absolutely, and that was exactly the point that made me kind of mad, you know. I was saying to them, but Sweden's always been the aspiration. You guys have the best maternity leave, the best paternity leave. You're seen as the epitome of a society that's truly evolved. And the funny thing was, after I put up my first article for Mail Online, a lady, a stranger, came over to me in a cafe and she said, you've got to keep going. You've got to keep speaking out on behalf of these women because they have been silenced. And funnily enough, or curiously enough, the lady, let's call her Lucy, that is too scared to go out of her apartment that was broken into last week and she had her car torched, she said she was frightened to have her picture taken because of the feminists. Because if she spoke out, she would be labelled a racist and they would hunt her down. So the feminists are now working against the women of Sweden, and they call them the extremists now. Feminists are the new extremists in Sweden, and they are part of the problem, part of the mafia that are silencing the problem that Trump, thankfully, spoke out about.
Yeah, it's not so different here. I mean, our media, as you know, worked feverishly to downplay any reports there might be a problem in Sweden. They're dishonest and politically motivated, so that wasn't surprising. What is surprising is how many Swedes are apparently afraid to say what they really think about what's happening there. Why is that?
Absolutely. There's this absolute belief, 80 years of liberal politicians, there's an absolute belief that Sweden is utopia, and that's the only message you can send. There's absolutely mandatory belief in multiculturalism. Eritrea, Somalia, Afghanistan, they don't just arrive in Sweden and then miraculously, you know, join the multicultural dream. No. They bring every war, every fight, every hostility with them. And there in Rinkeby, in Sweden, you have the Eritreans who hate the Somalians, who hate the Afghanis, and that's just brought with them. And we have the same in Calais. When I went to Calais to address the migrant situation, they're exactly the same. The Somalians don't speak to the Eritreans, who don't speak to the Afghanis. And absolutely, Sweden won't acknowledge that. They won't acknowledge they've got a problem, because that would mean admitting that everything they've believed in, multicultural ideas, are wrong, and that they shouldn't have let in 200,000 people in 2 years, and they're about to let in another 400,000 over the next 4 years. So this problem is not going away.
They'd rather destroy their own country than be called racist. I recognize that. Katie, thanks for joining us. No, you're a brave reporter.
Thank you very much.